Hello and welcome to London Guided Walks podcast. In the coming episodes, we will be sharing our love and passion for London, its people, places and history in an espresso shot with a splash of personality. For those of you who don't know me, I am Hazel Baker, founder of LondonGuidedWalks.co.uk, providing guided walks, private tours and treasure hunts to Londoners and visitors alike, and now bringing you a jam-packed podcast during the time of the coronavirus. We're lucky to have two guests on today's episode. Returning to the studio is our erudite guide, Ian McDiarmid.
Hello.
Today's episode was inspired by a conversation I had on Twitter where people were sharing their childhood foods. These included sugar sandwich and ketchup sandwich. For me, salt and vinegar crisp sandwiches were a big part of the fun of being a child, as was my mum's mashed potato surprise and my granny's apple pie. So what foods was it for you in your childhood that really brings back those feelings of nostalgia?
Well, it's interesting listening to you, Hazel, because in giving your memories, your foods that you cited, your views of them are universally positive. And following in that vein, I would look back on the puddings that we had as children, and I think my absolute favourite was bread and butter pudding. However, looking back on food, I also have some rather disturbing memories, which are associated indelibly with school, and in particular with primary school. And in particular, in my mind, stand out spam fritters. And I can't think, if somebody mentions the word spam to me in passing, I feel slightly unwell still immediately. It's like a Pavlovian response.
Hold on a minute. Spam fritters. What's wrong with spam fritters? They're crispy on the outside. They've got a lovely juiciness with the batter and the sweetness of the spam. I mean, what's not to like?
I can already feel in my mouth the first symptoms of beginning to feel slightly unwell. They're disgusting. The batter it was just pure grease, and then inside the spam, it was just revolting. It sort of had a horrible texture, horrible taste, a saltiness. Yeah, very strange. It just tasted as though it had been stuck together with glue, and then the stuff on the outside. Yeah, so spam fritters is my strong abiding memory. But the other one is of semolina. Now, if I was having semolina, which perhaps I should explain to younger people, because I don't think I've seen it in the shops since I was a child, is I think it's a bit similar to rice pudding, but much finer. So it's sort of white in colour. And if I had that at home, I would really like it. It's a sort of milky pudding. But at school, it was revolting. The grains of the semolina, they weren't cooked or something. It had a kind of grainy texture. And then they would always serve it up with raspberry jam. And so the idea was that you'd stir the raspberry jam into it. And the raspberry jam, were obviously looking back, was of such poor quality. So you'd stir it in, and the whole thing would be bright pink. The two foodstuffs at the top of my list. And I think it perhaps significant reflection of our different personalities, that you immediately reel off a list of foods and you think how good they were. And I'm reeling off a list and I'm going on criticising them. But the other thing, apart from the spam and the semolina, which immediately stick out in my mind, is just their horrible vegetables. I mean, the whole point about children and food is you're supposed to encourage them to eat vegetables, and they just couldn't cook. I mean, the vegetables, looking back, they were always overcooked. So the cabbage always tasted as though it had been cooked for about 40 minutes. So any texture it had that would be destroyed. And then it was never served up hot. It was always lukewarm at best and covered in water, so it hadn't been drained properly. So there you go. Those are my immediate reactions to your question. Childhood memories of food, and the bad ones come up. The bread and butter pudding is a positive one, though.
Yes. Now, when I asked our other guides what their favourite foods were as a child, Susan also said bread and butter pudding. So you're not alone with that. My mother's bread and butter pudding wasn't so great. When you ate a bit into it, it tasted like it had been shot. like it being a piece of game, because you get these little black pellets, which were obviously supposedly currants or raisins or something, and you'd be picking those out of your mouth as you're going. I can't stand bread and butter pudding to this day, unless it's Nigella Lawson's recipe and she uses croissants, so it's all a little bit more refined. But no, I can't do bread and butter
Yeah,
pudding.
oh, Nigel Lawson would use croissant, wouldn't she? It'd be in her croissant. And
Well, she uses stale croissants, which of course don't exist in our house, but you have to go out and buy croissants and then try and hide them for a day while they go
the
stale.
actual,
So, yeah, so you and Susan for bread and butter pudding, you're both up there. But she also said peanut butter and banana
mm,
sandwiches.
no.
No. Susan, I think you're on your own on that one. I mean, I did ask. I says, "Look, is it crunchy or smooth?" And she said, "Smooth, but both are good." And I thought, no, I just don't think I ever want to put that in my mouth. Thank you very
Um,
much.
I agree with you. I mean, I think with sandwiches, they shouldn't contain anything sweet. I mean, a little bit of relish maybe, but the idea of sort of sugary sandwiches is a bit of a no-no in my mind. I sympathise with you on the bread and butter pudding, and I hope your mother doesn't listen to this. I'm sure she won't, because the obviously at school they try to do black and bread and butter pudding, and that is exactly what they did to it. Now you mentioned it, it brought back the memories that the currents inside it were absolutely rock solid, and there's nothing you can do with them when you're trying to eat them. So yeah, I remember that. And of course, the school version had absolutely no texture. It was just kind of a mush. It wasn't really bread and butter pudding. It was kind of milky mush.
At primary school, our cook was Mrs. Jordan. And she was fabulous. I mean, I remember at primary school trying my first moussaka and my first goulash, and I loved them. Absolutely loved them. I kind of think, Ian, maybe you were a picky eater.
I kind of think that well, I was about to give the name of my school, but I namely gave the game away. I kind of think that at 1960s Hertfordshire County Council, you would never get anything like moussaka and goulash. They would just, those are exotic foods. Those aren't English. So it would be things like, oh no, I'm sorry, it's unpleasant doing this interview because it's bringing back memories. Uh, was it Toad in the Hole where you had because I'm vegetarian now, so it's a bit difficult remembering all these things. But oh dear, oh it's just horrible. I mean, maybe
What's wrong with
is
Toad
it
in
a
the Hole? Sausages and batter. I
oh
mean, you can't
no,
go
isn't it
wrong.
a sausage in Yorkshire pudding?
Yeah,
Oh. Well,
batter.
it sounds like a bad idea to begin with, but the sausages were. Oh, well, I mean, I can well imagine looking back that they were sort of 80% fat and 10% pork or whatever. And then the Yorkshire pudding. Oh, it was disgusting. It took me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was only when I was an adult that I realised the Yorkshire pudding could actually be quite nice. So.
Oh, I'm feeling sorry for you in your childhood. I mean, I must agree with you. The semolina, that reminded me of frog spawn.
Oh God, yes. It's funny talking to you now and just remembering all these foods and how appalling they were. I think we could change subject because otherwise we're just going to go on to. I'm just going to remember more and more horrible school foods as we go on.
Well, changing the subject, I mean, why don't you share some of your more positive experiences with food? First of all, you mentioned about
Hmm.
puddings, and I know you've mentioned in the past about castle puds or something. What are they?
Oh yeah, castle puds are little sponge puddings made in small cylindrical moulds that taper towards the top, so they look a bit like the turrets of castles. And I'm sure this has got another name to it, like syrup pudding or something. So anyway, just imagine a small amount of sponge with a small amount of syrup at the top. And they were fantastic, yeah. And the smell of those in the oven, that was brilliant. The puddings my mum made were fantastic. And then the other good food experience I had was going to Italy when I was 18, and not really knowing anything about um, Italy too much before going, and then discovering the food there. Just the way the Italians do food is just brilliant. I mean, it's not fancy, it's not complicated. It's just an emphasis on um, fresh ingredients which you can actually taste. And also, I think I probably have a natural affinity for the things the Italians like. Their use of herbs and their coffee and everything. I mean, it tastes and smells good, and it was a real revelation going there. Yeah, a real epiphany with food I had at the age of 18, and realised that it could be really, really.
So Italy sounds like a really great experience for you, and you certainly love your food now. So does that mean that you're a good cook?
No. Um, I think one thing that I brought home from Italy, though, which was I used to eat masses and masses of pasta. And I still love pasta. I mean, it's such a great food, quite easy to do something quite simple with. But no, I've never really mastered the art of cooking. I suspect that there's too much on reading instructions, which I'm not very good at. No, I'm not a good cook. Though I do make a nice cup of tea.
Well, that's something, I suppose. I'll tell you what, put the kettle on while I introduce our next guest. Our next guest has had a profound effect on my own childhood, and that is my mum. How would you describe your childhood experience with food?
It varies really, depending on whether it was my experience at home or at school. At home, my mother, for instance, lost her mother when she was about 5 years old, so she had no real role model in the house. Apart from my grandfather, who cooked suet puddings wrapped up in a tea towel and was steamed for several hours. And one slice of this, whether it be spotted dick, which is made with currants, or a gem roly-poly, just one slice would feed the family of 8 the whole day. That was the main meal. That's all she could remember. She can't remember him cooking anything else but steamed puddings. But her older sister took over all the household duties at 14, and I think she had, well, very little experience as well. So my mother had no chance of learning how to cook as such. As a result, obviously, she was inexperienced and just regarded food as something to stave off the hunger pains. And it gave a structure to the day. She thought about breakfast, dinner and tea, she called it, and tried to get over and done with as quickly as possible.
Did you have a favourite day of the week for meals?
I think Sunday was probably the best day of the week because we were well fed. We started with full English breakfast, which was always cooked by my father, and that always contained black pudding, egg, which he kind of splattered the fat over to get it white, bacon, fried bread, and canned tomatoes.
And what about Sunday lunch then?
Roast dinner was always the Sunday dinner, and we had it with Yorkshire pudding, which my mother's Yorkshire puddings rose so high they stuck to the shelf above, and when you got it out you had to get 2 shelves out at once. And she just served it with beef, nothing else, just beef. And there was always apple pie with custard for pudding.
Did you have other meats?
If we had pork, that was served with crackling, and lamb with mint sauce, which was picked from the garden.
And what about tea time?
And for tea, we always had tin pilchards in tomato sauce or ham with a salad. And the salad comprised of lettuce, boiled egg, tomato, cucumber and sour cream.
And what about school lunches then?
Well, I came home from primary school, as most children did, and therefore we had something like jacket potato and butter. Or an odd combination was tomato soup with mashed potatoes. So sometimes we had boiled egg. Very often we had sandwiches, bread and butter and jam, but never dripping like some friends had on their sandwiches.
Did you ever have sugar sandwiches or ketchup sandwiches?
No, I've heard of those, but no, we never had them. And again, another tin, this time of spaghetti on toast. They were light lunch. And then dinners were an assortment. Spam fritters were one of my favourites, but my mother could make batter, and her spam fritters were lovely and light. So we had those. Something called steaklets, and they were the forerunner of beef burgers. They were a new thing on the market at the time, and we had that at least once a week.
Was there anything in particular that Nana really excelled at cooking?
And her fried chips were lovely, to be honest. She really could cook chips. And then we'd have tins of vegetables, and we always had Morton's processed peas.
How did you make the chips?
Well, in a deep frying pan that was left out on the stove top. So whenever you went in the kitchen, he was there. And everything was cooked in lard, which was then, when it cooled, solidified. I never saw the pan washed out, just an extra helping of lard added to it if it needed topping up. I think she did try banana fritters now I think about it. So that was exotic or unusual for my mother to go out of her safety zone.
What about fish and chips? Did that play a part in your...
That's right.
Yeah?
It was the only takeaway that we had, really. And to be honest, we had the fish without the chips, or to be more precise, my father had a fish and my mother cooked her own chips. We never had fish from the chippy at all.
So you had, obviously, the milkman making deliveries. Did you have any other services?
The bread was delivered daily, and an assortment of ice buns and various cakes were also available if you wanted. If you wanted hot cross buns, you could order them and have them on Good Friday. That was the only day they were available. When I started my secondary education, I had to stay for school lunches, and I really enjoyed them. They introduced me to some new food that I'd never heard or seen of before. Chocolate concrete, which was served with either mint or raspberry flavoured custard, which, as you tried to break into it, shot off the dish, and it inevitably ended up on the table or floor. But we had such fun trying to tame that. And then we were also introduced to sponges. School did the most beautiful syrup sponge, golden syrup sponge, or a jam sponge, and they were a great favourite of mine.
What about things that you weren't so keen on?
Oh, well, the thing I remember most was a milk pudding, and I think it was semolina. I never tried semolina. I never ate it. I think I tried it and found it too coarse. And whenever we had a milk pudding, that was served with prunes.
The cooking that you did for your darling children, what were your biggest successes?
Successes? Oh.
Successes, yeah. Let's start on a positive note.
Thank you. I thought it's up to you. You could tell me what were my successes. What did you enjoy the most?
Well, I think we gave you instant feedback.
Yes, you all liked spaghetti bolognese.
Yes.
But I never cared for that much. You didn't have it that often. I think you all liked my lasagnas. I think I did okay with that. And we served that with a salad or garlic bread. Garlic was quite an introduction. I never had garlic in my childhood. I don't think I ever saw a garlic bulb till I was in my 20s.
I liked your toad in the hole. I mean, you made great batter. I know you said Nana did, but that was always lovely.
Say so, but nothing in comparison to my mother. Nothing.
And you did a good stew, and there were herbs in those dumplings.
Yes, that was my mother's stew, and it was my innovation to put herbs in to add a bit of flavour, because otherwise they're a bit stodgy and plain.
Yeah, and sweet corn fritters.
Oh, yes, I've forgotten about those. But it's not easy to get creamed sweet corn in a can now. But, I find it difficult to find that. But when you were younger, yes, I could get that and made the fritters. One way of getting you all to eat some vegetables that was different.
And what about your mashed potato supreme then?
I think that was off my mother. Just mashed potatoes with boiled egg mixed in and some cheese and some onion to give it flavour. I think she put in whatever she had left over from the week.
There was one that I used to like. I never know really what you called it, but you used to do minced beef with onions, with, I think it was gravy and Heinz baked beans mixed in, when then mashed potato on the top.
The mashed potato went on the top because that was a recipe for cowboy pie. And the actual topping should have been cornflakes mixed with butter.
And what about your quiches? They all went down well.
Well, yes. It's only father didn't like quiche, unfortunately.
What about leftovers? What did you do with those?
I mean, I was brought up, you don't waste food. You had something left over, you did what you could with it. I make chicken curry, I make pies and mix ham with the chicken. I do a variety of things. I mean, chicken is so easy to get now and so easy to cook. But as I said before, my childhood, I think I was 8 before we even had a chicken. And then it was a rarity. It was a treat, like, turkeys are a treat at Christmas.
Big thanks to both Ian and my mum for sharing their childhood memories of food, including bread and butter pudding, spam fritters and chocolate concrete. Join us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter and share your childhood foods with us. Thanks also to all those who have sent me lovely messages of encouragement for doing this podcast. It really is appreciated. Requests for future episodes have included London markets and London during World War II, so we'll add those to the list. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes, or you want to join me on a podcast and share your memories or knowledge of London, then please visit londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast and get in touch.